Hey everybody, so Spider-Man Far From Home is out, so it's time to do our final MCU ranking of 2019. If you have not seen Far From Home, this ranking will contain spoilers. Now, let's rank 23 MCU films, worst to best. Coming in at 23 is Thor: The Dark World. This movie does not work on so many levels. The villain is lame. The final act is forgettable. Natalie Portman as Jane just drags this movie so much, man. And Thor, this just isn't prime Thor time. Luckily, after this movie, they decided to switch Thor up and made him so much better. At number 22 is Iron Man 2. This movie's just never really done it for me. Something about the way they used Whiplash, they underused him, honestly. Instead of him, they used Justin Hammer as sort of the main villain instead of him, when Whiplash is such a better villain. And just the whole thing about Tony being just so arrogant to, try and protect Pepper and everything. I know he loves her, but damn, he was arrogant in that movie. At 21 is The Incredible Hulk. This is an underrated film. It's the only film made by Universal, so it's going to have some controversial things in it. But honestly, I think this has one of the most underrated final acts in the entire MCU. The final act is what probably is not making this last. Because everything about the movie, it's sort of boring, but there is some action-packed moments in there. Edward Norton as the Hulk is really, really cool, and I love Mark Ruffalo, but I love him. 20 is Iron Man 3. I just never really got the idea of why they decided to take one of the best villains in the comic books, the Mandarin, and they totally do a bait and switch, and instead we get this lame villain in Killian. And it's just so poorly done. And all of that build up, and there are some good parts of this, but the Mandarin part just killed everything. At 19 is Thor. There is some good fish out of water stuff in this movie. And there's some really good, dialogue between Thor and these characters that don't really know what's happening with him and Asgard. The Destroyer fight is cool. Loki fake dying and then coming back in Avengers is just really lame and sort of watered down as you look at the rest of the MCU and notice how many times he does this bait and switch where he dies and comes back. Otherwise, it's a decent film, decent origin story, but still not that good. 18 is Ant-Man. They decided to change things up at this point in the MCU. They had some good things going for them, so they decided to switch it up for this movie and made this a heist film about this criminal. It's sort of like, the only reason that it's really low, it's pretty low on my list, is that it copies a lot of elements. It invests heavily from ideas of Iron Man. With this billionaire trying to steal from the genius that has everything. That's the only reason it's lower. At 17 is Captain America, the First Avenger. I love this movie. Just such a great origin story, and looking back on Captain America, especially since 4th of July was yesterday, I rewatched this one. It still holds up. And just seeing Steve Rogers go from this scrawny teen from Brooklyn to this huge powerhouse war machine, no pun intended there, Captain America, is just really awesome to see. At number 16 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. You guys might be confused because Ant-Man and the Wasp is in my top 10. I watched this twice to get a general, defined idea of what I thought of this movie. I've only seen it once. Now I've seen it 3 times. And it's a good movie. It just isn't as good as some of the other ones. There are some decent stuff in there with, the whole MacGuffin plot, line where they're trying to get the labs, different groups trying to get the labs. There's Ant-Man's group and, the weird, guys that want to sell it group. And then there's Ghost and Lawrence Fishburne's character trying to get it. It's all very good and surreal, and it's a great sequel to the first movie, but just doesn't hold up to some of these other films. 15 is Avengers: Age of Ultron. One of the big things that weighs this movie down is the final result in Ultron. He is a good villain, but he is so he's played as such a like a arrogant. He's supposed to be arrogant, but he's like funny arrogant. Like he cracks jokes, and that's just not who Ultron is in the comics. He is a no BS type guy, and we do see some of that in this movie, but not that much. Quicksilver's death, just getting rid of him out of the blue, is just not a good decision by Marvel. But the Hulkbuster fight in the final act is good. 14 is Captain Marvel. This is a good origin story. It gets weighed down by the fact it's an origin story, but when you look at it, it is a really, really well done origin story, and probably one of my favorite solo films in the MCU. And Brie Larson does her absolute best as Captain Marvel. We get Goose the Cat. Samuel L. Jackson as a younger Nick Fury is great. The whole plot line about the Skrulls and Kree, who are the bad guys and the good guys in that situation. The action, the final act where she's, truly powerful, going through space, blowing up everything. It's a really fun time. At number 13 is Iron Man. Tony Stark goes from this arrogant and absorbent wacko and brilliant. He's basically a brilliant jerk, like a lot of the protagonists in these movies before they become superheroes. You got Doctor Strange, Ant-Man. But when you look back at this movie, Tony Stark has the most significant change as he goes through the motions in this movie, realizing who he's supposed to be, how he's supposed to protect people, along with protecting of course Pepper. Obadiah Stane is a really underrated villain, and Jeff Bridges was really good in that role. And this is just one of those movies, and the first MCU movie, it really holds up. At 12 is Captain America, The Winter Soldier. This is a political thriller, and I really didn't think I would be into that. But I really, really dug this film. With Bucky being our main villain, but not really. Alexander Pierce, Robert Redford's character, Alexander Pierce, is our main villain. Just the whole idea of Hydra being infiltrated inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. for all of this time. Apparently since the Avengers, as Endgame clarifies, when they're back in New York. And it's just such an awesome and powerful final act to this amazing movie. At 11 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. After a really, really amazing introduction to these characters, the sequel follows up with an incredibly fun and energetic plot as these characters are split apart, but then eventually come back together in a final act that isn't all that great, but it does have some good highlights. Ego as our villain, while not being the best as most of the film he's just dropping exposition, serves as a great villain. And Star-Lord was held out of the action. That's my only complaint. At number 10 is Guardians of the Galaxy. Kicking off for top 10 is one of the biggest risks that Marvel has ever taken in a film of theirs. James Gunn, as our director for this movie, he absolutely pulled off this overall feel of the quirky attitudes of these characters, the action, the prison break, the final battle, Ronan, the intense, dialogue at the end with Gamora and Drax is like, it's really Thanos I have to kill. Just building up certain things for Infinity War and Endgame. This is one of the most influential films in the MCU. At number 9 is Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is an absolute classic. And the way the visuals work with the spinny, upside-down buildings is just so incredibly well done. This movie has the best visuals in the MCU, in my opinion, next to, of course, Endgame. And I really love Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, of course, Benedict Wong as Wong. Baron Mordo is introduced in this movie, and the after-credits scene sets him up as a villain for the sequel. And of course, Tilda Swinton as Ancient One is never to be forgotten. At number 8 is Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. After watching this movie, I realized it's not that as powerful and as good as I thought it was, but it still ends up clocking into our top 10 because this is an absolute cult following. I know it's such an overrated movie, but it has justifying reasons for that, as you watch T'Challa struggle to be the king and be a superhero and be a role model for all of these citizens of Wakanda. And Eric Killmonger as our villain is just such a compelling and one of the most emotional packed villains in the MCU. It's a great ride. At number 7 is Spider-Man Homecoming. This is a really, really cool Spider-Man movie. It's my third favorite Spider-Man movie out of all of them, the Maguire films and the Garfield films and Into the Spider-Verse. And I really, really dig Michael Keaton as Vulture. That is the part of this movie that really, really sells it for me. Michael Keaton as Vulture was fantastic. He's one of the best villains in the MCU to date. Tom Holland as our Spider-Man is fantastic. We get great side characters like Zendaya as MJ. We get Ned in there. We get, just so many good setups. At number 6 is Thor Ragnarok. I recently watched another MCU movie, and it triumphed this one in my opinion. Looking back on this, I watched both of these movies that I'm talking about. And Thor Ragnarok, while not being as good as the movie ahead of it, is such a fun ride, man. Thor versus the Hulk and their final battle on the Rainbow Bridge with Hela's forces, Thor getting his eye scratched out, and Odin's death, and him taking out Surtur in the first 10 minutes of the film. And we have Jeff Goldblum, Mark Ruffalo, Hela is one of my favorite villains in the MCU, with her being the goddess of death. She absolutely delivers, kicks ass, and Thor, this proves him to be one of the strongest Avengers. But rewatching this over the weekend twice, like I did with Ant-Man and the Wasp, is the Avengers. I freaking love this movie. This is one of the best team-up films to date in the MCU and in cinema history, and it has one of the best final battles, not just in Marvel movies, but in any movie I have ever seen. The team-ups, these characters that we've been watching for so many years at this point, in 2012, coming together is just so exciting. And Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, these two personalities coming together, and Thor and Bruce Banner coming together, these two personalities, it just makes for such a fun ride in this awesome action-packed movie. At number 4 is Captain America Civil War. I incredibly love this film. It defies all aspects of Age of Ultron. I actually like to see this as our Avengers 2 and Age of Ultron as a separate thing, because this movie serves as one of the most action-packed Avenger movies ever, and it's not even an Avenger movie. We have the airport fight, the final fight with Cap, Tony, and Bucky, which is one of the most emotional fights in the MCU. These two personalities, like I said, in Avengers, coming together and clashing and seeing how that affects the Avengers as a whole, with these two role models and these two people that you look up to, seeing them fight is brutal. At number 3, though, is Spider-Man Far From Home. I ended up loving this movie more than I anticipated. I predicted this movie to be in between Black Panther and Homecoming. Nowhere did I expect this to be number 3. This movie delivers on everything. It bridges Endgame and this movie perfectly. It wraps up the Infinity Saga right nice in a bow, with Peter Parker's identity being exposed, Mysterio as our villain, Jake Gyllenhaal, even though he dies, and it's actually a really sympathetic death, even though you're not supposed to care about him, but you do end up caring about him because he's such a fun and awesome character in this movie. Zendaya, Ned, Flash, Happy, Aunt May, everybody has a moment to shine. It's a fantastic follow-up to Homecoming. At number 2 is Avengers Infinity War. The culmination of 10 years in the MCU comes together as these awesome characters, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, all these great personalities coming together in one scene, fighting. Every single moment of this movie is just chock full of fan service and just emotion, and you feel every single hit thrown at the Avengers and every single gut-wrenching Just, oh my gosh, man. The deaths at the end of this film, the snap, the fact that we got the Thanos snap in this movie. We got the Thanos snap, the Wakanda battle, Cap holding back Thanos. It all comes together as one of the best team-up movies of all time. But of course, at number 1 is Avengers Endgame. An absolutely astounding achievement in cinema. Avengers Endgame is the best movie in the MCU, in my opinion. I love everything about it. From the characters, the action, the final fight is one of the best fights. No, the best fight in the MCU. Everyone you love is there, fighting Thanos, fighting the Outriders, fighting Levithians, fighting the Black Order. Every single moment of this movie, like Infinity War, is fan service. Cap wielding Mjolnir. You have Cap fighting Cap. Thor getting his hammer back. You have Thor chopping Thanos' head off in like the first 15 minutes. That's really good. Captain Marvel, saving Tony. Just so many awesome and amazing moments that, for people that haven't seen any of the other Marvel movies, you need to see that. You need to see every Marvel movie to understand Endgame, not just because of the plot, because of all of the references. We have Robert Redford coming back from Winter Soldier. We have Black Widow and Hawkeye mentioning Budapest. And that's another thing about this movie. Black Widow's sacrifice is so emotional. Also, a little bit more emotional. I love Black Widow, though. Tony Stark's death. Tony Stark, the man that started it all, he dies. Cap turns old. It's just so much emotion flowing through this one movie that has been, it has a cult following for all these years, me included. I was hooked from Civil War on, and then I watched all the other movies. I got hyped for this movie, and I was not disappointed at all, man, because the emotion you experience in this movie, it is like it's unlike any other thing I've ever seen. I'm being absolutely 100% honest with that, because I just, in the theater, I was absolutely bawling because of what I was witnessing. Not even because of the deaths, just because of the overall awesomeness of it, and that the fact that it was worth it. It was all worth it. Waiting 11 years for this movie, it was worth it. It was worth every second, every penny, every dollar, every single effect, every single second, minute, hour, day, month, and year of waiting. It was all worth it for this movie. And that is why Avengers Endgame is my favorite movie in the MCU. Now, let me know what your favorite movie is, the MCU. Let me know your ranking down in the comments below. Let me know if you disagree or agree. Even if we do disagree, it's fun. Let's have a lively conversation about it. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.